There are parts of Worcester where the 21st century feels like a thin veneer. Places where the pace of modern life fades, where shadows seem to gather and old spirits still roam. Today I'm walking through this ancient city, its cathedral, Commandery and Guildhall, searching for the places where the past refuses to stay buried. Join me as I explore Worcester's haunted history. There has been a settlement at Worcester for more than 2,000 years. The Romans recognised its strategic importance. Later, the Anglo-Saxons established a religious centre here. In around 680, the first cathedral, dedicated to St. Peter, was founded on this site. Worcester was refortified by Ethelred of Mercia in the late 9th century. Around 100 years later, Bishop Oswald began the construction of a new cathedral, dedicated to St. Mary. According to legend, he instructed the builders to use a great stone lying nearby, yet no man could move it. Oswald prayed to discover what held it fast and saw, perched upon the stone, a small black devil. After exorcising the demon, the stone moved with ease. Those early cathedrals are long gone, destroyed during periods of conflict and upheaval. But in 1084, Bishop Wulfstan began work on the present cathedral, parts of which still survive today, including the magnificent Norman crypt beneath the building. Wulfstan would later become a saint, and in 1218 a new shrine was built to house his remains. Unfortunately, the shrine proved too small, and tradition has it that the bishop overseeing this work cut up Wulfstan's body with his own hands in order to make it fit. Perhaps an unwise decision, as he died only 6 weeks later, a death some saw as divine punishment. Sadly, the shrine was destroyed during the Reformation. In front of the high altar here stands the tomb of King John, displaying the oldest royal effigy in England. After his death in 1216, legend claims the king had himself buried between St. Oswald and St. Wulfstan in a monk's habit, hoping to pass unnoticed into heaven and escape punishment for his crimes. And when the tomb was opened in 1797, the king was found wearing a cloth head covering. Today, though, historians tend to interpret this not as a monk's cowl, but as a royal coif, part of the coronation regalia buried with the king. In a building shaped by centuries of death and devotion, stories of hauntings perhaps become inevitable. William Knox Little, who became a canon at Worcester in 1881, told friends and colleagues that he not only saw a ghost within these cloisters, but regularly spoke with it. On another occasion, while sitting in the drawing room of the college house within the cathedral precincts, Knox Little suddenly pointed towards a chair and asked, "Who is that sitting there?" When those around him replied that the chair was empty, he answered, "It may be now, but there was someone sitting there." Rising above the cloisters and cathedral grounds is the tower, the third to stand on this site. The present tower, completed in 1374, has watched over Worcester through plague, fire, Reformation, civil war and siege. And in 1651, its height gave one man a view of unfolding disaster. During the Battle of Worcester, the future Charles II climbed the cathedral tower to look out across the fighting below. From here, he watched Oliver Cromwell's parliamentarian forces overwhelm the city and destroy the last major royalist army of the English Civil War. In August 1651, Charles had entered Worcester at the head of an army. Cromwell followed soon after, assembling his forces around the city at Red Hill and Powick. Then, on the 3rd of September, the attack began. Fighting raged through the streets. By the end of the day, thousands were dead, wounded, or captured, and the royalist cause lay in ruins. Charles himself only narrowly escaped. Local folklore states that one of Cromwell's troopers recognised the fleeing king and rode towards him. Nearby stood an abandoned ammunition wagon, the oxen still harnessed in place. A Worcester citizen named William Bagnall seized the leading bridle and dragged the animals across the road, blocking the pursuing soldier just long enough for Charles to slip away. He reached his lodgings on New Street moments before parliamentarian troops arrived, escaping through the back door as his enemies entered through the front. That building still stands today. Now known as the King Charles II pub, its timber-framed facade bears a plaque commemorating the King's narrow escape and the role the house played in Worcester's turbulent past. But while royalists remembered Charles as the miraculous survivor of Worcester, they viewed Cromwell's victory in darker terms. Some claimed he had only triumphed because he had help from the devil himself. Rumours abounded that on the morning of the 3rd of September, Cromwell entered nearby Perry Wood and offered his soul in exchange for victory. In return, he was promised not only success in battle, but 7 more years of life. And 7 years to the very day after the Battle of Worcester, Oliver Cromwell died. Violent storms swept across the country, and for some, this was proof that the devil had finally come to claim the soul owed to him. A plaque commemorating the Battle of Worcester sits on the bridge approaching the Commandery, the building that served as royalist headquarters during the fighting. But the Commandery's history stretches back far beyond the Civil War, to when it was a place of suffering, refuge, and death. The Commandery site has been occupied for more than 1,000 years. By the 10th century, a chapel dedicated to St Godwald stood here, just outside the city walls. Then, around 1085, Bishop Wulfstan founded the Hospital of St Wulfstan here, a place intended for the poor, the dying, and pilgrims passing through Worcester. In the medieval world, hospitals were not places of cure in the modern sense. They were places where the sick and destitute came to prepare for death, surrounded by prayer and religious care. For centuries, the Commandery would have seen a constant procession of plague and illness moving through its halls, and the daily presence of mortality within its walls. Much of the building that survives today dates from a major rebuilding in the 15th century. The great hall roof above visitors now was already old when the Wars of the Roses were being fought. But the Commandery's religious life came to an end during the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII. The chapel was stripped and abandoned, and the old hospital became a private residence. By the mid-17th century, Worcester had become one of the last strongholds of the royalist cause. The Commandery, then owned by the royalist Wild family, was chosen as headquarters for Charles II's army during the final battle of the English Civil War. Just beyond the building rises Fort Royal Hill, once part of Worcester's defensive earthworks. In 1651, it was fortified as parliamentarian forces closed in on the city. Cannon fire thundered across these streets, and soldiers fought and died around the Commandery itself. Few places in Worcester have stood so close to suffering for so long. A medieval hospice, a religious house destroyed by reform, a military headquarters at the scene of catastrophe. Perhaps it is no surprise that so many ghost stories have gathered here. One of the strangest incidents came from the building's old security system. At the time, the monitoring company could listen remotely into whichever room had triggered an alarm. Late one night, a sensor was activated inside the empty building. When the operator opened the audio feed, expecting perhaps an intruder, they instead heard the faint sound of monks chanting somewhere in the darkness. Staff working alone have described feeling unwelcome here. One employee, locking up for the night, suddenly felt hands grip his shoulders and shove him backwards, throwing him to the floor. The next morning, bruises appeared where the unseen hands had touched him. Others have reported whispers close to their ears, the sound of breathing behind them, or the unmistakable sensation of being prodded in the back when nobody is there. Footsteps are heard constantly throughout the Commandery, slow movements crossing empty rooms above, or the sound of someone approaching through corridors that stand deserted. During an overnight stay in the gardens, Civil War reenactors reported hearing the steady beat of a drum and the sound of soldiers marching through wet mud by their tents. Yet when they looked outside, there was no one there, and the ground was completely dry. Not all the reported spirits seem threatening. In the Tudor rooms, visitors have claimed to hear the laughter of a child, while others describe the sound of a baby crying somewhere deep within the building. Shadow figures are also commonly reported, sometimes even in broad daylight. One staff member described seeing what appeared to be a phantom foot, a yellow shoe beneath the hem of a dress, calmly walking across the room before fading into nothing. And then there are the objects that seem to move of their own accord. Doors swing open and slam shut without warning. Books have flown from shelves. During a rehearsal for a ghost tour, a member of staff mentioned Robert Wilde, one of the Commandery's former owners, who's said to haunt the building still. At the exact moment his name was spoken, the latch of the kitchen door began rattling violently, though nobody stood on the other side. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the Hamilton Room. Here, staff once watched as a clock suddenly launched itself from the mantelpiece without explanation. The room takes its name from the Duke of Hamilton, one of Charles II's commanders during the Battle of Worcester. He was shot in the leg and carried back here, where his wound was examined by both Cavalier and Roundhead surgeons, each one with a differing opinion on whether amputation was required. The Duke died 9 days later. His blood is said to have stained the floor of this room, and no amount of scrubbing can remove it. Beyond the Commandery, Worcester begins to change. The memory of battle fades into older streets shaped by pilgrimage, religion, and trade. Timber-framed buildings lean over narrow lanes, and the city settles into a quieter atmosphere, though not necessarily a more peaceful one. It is here, in the heart of Friar Street, that we find one of Worcester's oldest surviving inns, the Cardinal's Hat. Dating back to the 14th century, this once formed part of a network of lodgings established to house pilgrims and travellers. A stone's throw from the cathedral, it would have welcomed those arriving seeking food and shelter after long journeys. Over the centuries, it's carried different names, including the Swan and Falcon and the Coventry Arms. Yet in the low beams, uneven floors and narrow corridors, something of medieval Worcester still clings to the building. There is the sense that the structure has absorbed the lives that passed through it. And like so many places in Worcester, it is said not all of those lives ever truly left. Locals and staff speak of footsteps moving along empty corridors after closing time and doors that open and shut when no one is present. One ghost is said to be particularly active. Emily, a young woman who died in a fire within the building. Often seen dressed in a white nightgown, Emily haunts the second floor, moving objects or making them disappear. Despite the tragic nature of her death, Emily's described as a playful presence, not something to be afraid of. One landlord was, however, woken on their first night in the pub by toiletries being thrown across the bathroom as though flung by an unseen hand. In the back room, another figure is sometimes noticed, a seated man referred to only as the Cardinal, watching silently from the corner. And yet, for all its spectral activity, the Cardinal's Hat remains what it has always been, a place of shelter, gathering, and passing lives. Even if, it seems, not all of those lives have finished passing through. Away from the cathedral, the old inns and ecclesiastical streets, Worcester opens into a different kind of power. Not spiritual authority this time, nor military command, but civic judgment. Here, we find the Guildhall. Set on the High Street in the very centre of Worcester, the Guildhall was first established in 1227, with the current building completed 300 years ago. Across its 8 centuries, it has been used as a court, a prison, council offices, and a venue for thousands of public events. Above the entrance, a striking carved head is said to depict Oliver Cromwell, rendered not as a statesman, but as a horned devil nailed by the ears as a warning. By contrast, figures of Charles I and Charles II stand more proudly to either side of the main door. But beneath this carefully composed surface lies something far less orderly. In the Guildhall's undercroft are the holding cells, where those awaiting trial and those condemned to death were locked away. It is in these cramped, dark rooms that some of Worcester's most persistent stories are said to remain. One concerns the ghost of a small boy who haunts the middle cell. Accounts differ as to his fate. Some say he hanged himself, others that he was strangled, but all agree he never left. Visitors have long reported a childlike presence here, a sense of being watched, sudden chills, and in some cases, the unmistakable sound of movement in empty space. In the north cell, another shadow remains, a woman whose identity is unknown, but who is still felt in the colder corners of the room. Even now, people describe hearing moaning and screaming rising from the cells when the air seems to shift and tighten without explanation. It's easy, standing here, to think back through the city's other haunted spaces, the Commandery, the Cathedral, the inns and streets, each place offering its own form of containment, be that spiritual, military, domestic or civic. And here, in the Guildhall, containment becomes final, the last holding place for those whom the city decided it could no longer accommodate. When you step back from these places, it becomes clear that Worcester is not a city that keeps its stories neatly contained. They persist in the spaces where human experience was most intense, places where people prayed, fought, hid, suffered, waited, and died. Places where memory has had a long time to settle into stone. Some of what I've told here may be folklore layered onto folklore, Victorian imagination building upon earlier fragments, shaping them into something more dramatic than what came before. But even invention has its own kind of truth. And whether you read these stories as echoes of something unexplained, or as the slow accumulation of memory and meaning, they speak to the same idea. Places remember through the weight of what has happened within them, and the way those events continue to be retold. In Worcester, the past does not feel distant. It lingers just beneath the surface of ordinary streets and familiar buildings, woven into stone, memory, and story. Perhaps that is why these hauntings endure. So much history has gathered here that the dead never feel entirely absent. And when evening settles over Worcester, when the cathedral bells fade, the streets grow quiet, and the last lights burn behind medieval windows, it becomes easier to imagine that some part of the old city is still awake, still watching.